5 years. For 5 years, the only sounds that mattered were the snap of a twig under my boot, the rustle of a rabbit in my snare, and the whisper of the wind telling me I was still alone. Still free. It was a fragile peace, built on a foundation of paranoia and isolation, and I guarded it like a dragon guards its hoard. So when a different sound cut through the familiar symphony of the Oregon wilderness, every nerve ending I possessed went on high alert. It wasn't an animal. It was a whimper. A thin, reedy cry that was swallowed almost immediately by the dense pines. My training, the brutal lessons that had kept me alive, screamed at me. Trap. Ambush. Run. Rogues were known for their cruelty, for using the illusion of weakness to lure you in. My hand instinctively went to the hunting knife strapped to my thigh. I should have turned back. I should have melted back into the woods and fortified the wards around my cabin. But the sound came again, choked and full of a pain so profound it bypassed my brain and speared me straight through the heart. Damn it! I moved against my better judgment, my steps silent on the thick bed of pine needles. The coppery tang of blood and the sharp, unmistakable scent of ozone that clung to terrified werewolves hit my nose before I saw him. He was small, maybe 6 years old, huddled at the base of a massive cedar. His clothes were torn, one leg bent at an unnatural angle, and his face was a mess of dirt, tears, and blood from a gash on his forehead. But it was his eyes that stopped my breath. They were huge, dark, and so full of raw terror they looked like shattered windows into a nightmare. His scent was a screaming beacon in the supernatural world. Pup, werewolf lost. And in danger. Every survival instinct I had honed over the last half-decade was a blaring siren in my head. A lost pup meant a pack. A pack meant an alpha. An alpha meant questions, authority, and the one thing I could never allow, discovery. My healing gift wasn't a blessing. It was a curse that had gotten my family killed and would get me enslaved if the wrong pack ever found me. The boy flinched as I took a step closer, trying to scramble backward, a pained hiss escaping his lips as he jostled his broken leg. Hey, it's okay," I murmured, keeping my voice low and soft, my hands held out where he could see them. "I'm not going to hurt you." He stared at me, his little chest heaving with panicked breaths. He didn't believe me. Why would he? The world had clearly already shown him its teeth. My internal conflict was a physical war. The rogue in me, the survivor, was already mapping escape routes. But the woman I used to be, the one who hadn't yet learned that compassion was a liability, was already kneeling in the dirt. "My name is Freya," I said softly. "Can you tell me yours?" He just shook his head, his jaw clamped shut as fresh tears welled. He wasn't just scared, he was traumatized into silence. Screw it. I couldn't leave him here to die. If my freedom was the price for saving a child, then maybe it was a price I had to be willing to pay. "Okay, little one. I'm going to pick you up now. It might hurt, but I'll be as gentle as I can. We're going to get you somewhere warm." As my fingers brushed his arm, a faint warmth bloomed in my palm, the telltale hum of my gift waking up. It wanted to soothe, to mend. I suppressed it ruthlessly. Not here. Not out in the open. When I scooped him into my arms, he was shockingly light. He stiffened for a second, then, as if his terror had finally exhausted him, he collapsed against my chest, his small hands fisting into the fabric of my shirt. He tucked his face into my neck, and a shudder racked his tiny body. In that moment, something fierce and hot and dangerously maternal coiled in my gut. It was a feeling I hadn't allowed myself to have in years. A protective instinct so powerful it was a physical ache. Back in the cabin, I laid him gently on my cot. As I worked, cleaning his wounds with practiced efficiency, he never made a sound. He just watched me, his gaze unwavering. When I touched the gash on his forehead, I let a tiny thread of my power seep out. A soft, golden warmth that knitted the skin together, leaving only a thin, pink line behind. His eyes widened slightly, but he didn't pull away. He leaned into my touch. When I finished splinting his leg, I wrapped him in my warmest quilt. He clung to my hand, his grip surprisingly strong, refusing to let go. He wouldn't eat, wouldn't drink, just stared into the fire I'd built, his small body trembling. I sat on the floor beside the cot, his hand still in mine, and watched the shadows lengthen outside my single window. I had just broken every one of my own rules. I had brought a beacon of trouble into my sanctuary. Somewhere out there, a pack was hunting for this child. An alpha was hunting, and they would be powerful, relentless, and they would follow this pup's scent right to my front door. I had saved a lost child, but in doing so, I knew with chilling certainty that I had just lost myself.
3 weeks. 21 days of a cold, dead trail, and the acid of failure burning a hole in my gut. My wolf paced the cage of my ribs, a frantic, snarling beast half-mad with grief. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig was the sound of my nephew, Tommy, crying out. Every gust of wind carried the phantom scent of his blood. My pack, the strongest in the Pacific Northwest, looked to me for answers, and I had none. I had failed my sister. I had failed her son. The guilt was a physical weight, pressing down until my bones ached with it. I'd pushed myself and my best trackers past exhaustion, fueled by nothing but black coffee and rage. The trail had led us into this isolated stretch of the Oregon wilderness, a known haven for rogues and runaways, and then gone cold. My trackers had wanted to regroup, to form a wider search grid. I refused. I sent them back and continued alone. My wolf knew. He knew we were close. It was an instinct I couldn't explain, a pull in my soul tethered to my blood. Then I caught it. Faint, almost lost in the scent of damp pine and rotting leaves, but it was there. Unmistakable. The sweet, milky scent of a werewolf pup. My pup. Tommy. Hope, sharp and agonizing, sliced through the despair. I broke into a run, branches whipping at my face, my lungs burning. The scent grew stronger, pulling me forward like a rope. It led me to a small, dilapidated cabin, smoke curling lazily from a stone chimney. Arrogues den. Pure, undiluted fury surged through me. A rogue had my nephew. I would tear them limb from limb. I would burn this cabin to the ground with their corpse inside. I slowed my approach, my boots making no sound on the forest floor. I was a predator stalking its prey, every muscle coiled tight. The scent of Tommy was thick here, a beacon of life that both soothed my wolf and stoked its rage. But as I crept closer, another scent wove through it. It wasn't pine. It wasn't wood smoke. It was wild ginger and clean, fresh rain. It was the scent of home, of belonging, of everything I never knew I was missing. It bypassed my brain, ignored the rage and the grief, and slammed directly into the core of my being. My wolf threw its head back and roared inside my skull, a single, possessive word that shook me to my foundations. Mate. The world tilted. The air crackled. My heart, which had been a stone in my chest for weeks, hammered against my ribs. Mine. The instinct was so powerful, so absolute, it nearly brought me to my knees. Here? Now? The moon goddess had a sick sense of humor. The cabin door creaked open. She stepped out, and the scent became a physical blow. She was small, but her presence was immense, radiating a defiant energy that vibrated in the air. Wild, dark hair framed a face with high cheekbones and eyes that burned with suspicion. She held a shotgun leveled at my chest, her knuckles white. And clinging to her leg, half hidden behind her, was Tommy. My breath hitched. Alive. The relief was so profound, so staggering, it almost buckled my legs. He was thin, pale, but he was breathing. He was alive. My gaze snapped from my nephew back to the woman. My mate. She wasn't some soft-pack female who would recognize her alpha and submit. She was a cornered wolf, ready to fight to the death. And she was protecting my nephew from me. He's mine, I growled, the words torn from my throat. I didn't know if I was talking about the boy or her. Both. Her chin lifted. The barrel of the shotgun didn't waver. Stay right where you are. Her voice was a low, dangerous hum. I took a step. My wolf demanded it. Take them. Our mate. Our pup. Protect. The click of the shotgun's safety being disengaged was deafening in the quiet woods. I won't say it again. Control. I was an alpha. I needed control. I forced my hands up in a gesture of surrender that felt utterly alien. My entire being screamed to charge forward, to wrap them both in my arms and never let go. I'm not going to hurt you, I said, my voice rough with emotion. The boy. He's my nephew. I shifted my focus to Tommy, trying to soften my features, to project the calm I didn't feel. Tommy, I choked out, my voice cracking on his name. Buddy, it's me. It's Uncle Riker. Instead of the joyful reunion I had pictured in my darkest hours, Tommy flinched as if I'd struck him. A small, strangled whimper escaped his lips, and he buried his face deeper into my mate's leg, his small hands clutching her jeans. That sound shattered me. It wasn't just fear in his eyes. It was a deep, hollowed-out terror that I didn't recognize. I saw it then, the dark bruises mottling the pale skin of his arm, the way his shoulders hunched as if waiting for a blow. This wasn't my laughing, vibrant nephew. This was a ghost. The rage I'd felt toward his kidnappers was nothing compared to the tidal wave of self-loathing and grief that crashed over me. They hadn't just taken him. They had broken him. My mate, this fierce rogue woman, saw the shift in my eyes. Her stance softened infinitesimally, but her grip on the shotgun remained. She was a shield, and my broken nephew was hiding behind her. Hiding from me. The truth hit me with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't just scared of strangers. He was scared of me.
The air in the clearing crackled, thick with the scent of pine, ozone, and the overwhelming primal musk of the alpha in front of me. My shotgun felt like a child's toy against the sheer predatory power rolling off him in waves. Every cell in my body screamed two contradictory things at once: danger, run, and mate, mine. The second one was a terrifying, insidious whisper I was trying desperately to ignore. He was exactly as the whispers described: massive, carved from granite and fury, with eyes that promised to take whatever they landed on. And right now they were locked on the small, trembling boy in my arms. "Give him to me," Riker Steele growled. It wasn't a request. It was a command meant to be obeyed, the kind of alpha order that buckled knees and bent wills. My will didn't bend. It hardened into steel. "No." Tommy flinched at the sound of Riker's voice, his tiny fingers digging into my shirt so hard I was sure they'd leave bruises. He buried his face in the curve of my neck, a silent, terrified plea. Riker took a step forward, and that's when his gaze finally dropped from Tommy's face to the crude bandages on his leg, the gash on his forehead I'd carefully cleaned, the haunted emptiness in his eyes. The alpha's momentum stopped. The air hitched in his lungs. The raw power radiating from him didn't just vanish. It imploded, collapsing inward until the man seemed to shrink before my eyes. The predator was gone, replaced by something shattered. A sound tore from his throat, a choked, guttural noise of pure agony that had nothing to do with an alpha's dominance and everything to do with a man's broken heart. He dropped to his knees. The forest floor seemed to shudder with the impact. The big, bad alpha, the monster from the stories, was on his knees in the dirt, his head bowed. My own breath caught. This wasn't in the script. I was prepared for a fight, for threats, for him to try and rip Tommy from my arms. I was not prepared for this. When he looked up again, his face was a mask of utter devastation. Tears tracked clean paths through the grime on his cheeks. "Tommy," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Gods, what did they do to you?" At the sound of his name, Tommy whimpered and pressed himself impossibly closer to me, his small body shaking with silent sobs. Riker's face crumpled completely. He saw the terror. He saw that the boy he'd been hunting for, the nephew he was here to save, was petrified of him. My carefully constructed walls, the ones built from 5 years of running and mistrust, developed a hairline crack. The ruthless alpha I'd expected was nowhere to be seen. In his place was a man being flayed alive by his failure to protect his family. It was a vulnerability so profound it felt more dangerous than any show of strength. It disarmed me completely. He made a move to crawl closer, his hands held up in a gesture of surrender. "It's okay, pup. It's me. It's Uncle Riker." Tommy let out a small, terrified cry and hid his face again. "Stop," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "You're scaring him." Riker froze, his expression wounded. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. The alpha command was gone, replaced by raw desperation. "He's my nephew. He's all I have left of my sister." The crack in my wall widened. I knew what it was to lose family. "And right now," I said, my voice softening just a fraction, "he thinks you're one of them. The men who hurt him. Look at him. He's traumatized. You can't just charge in here and claim him like a piece of property." For a long moment he just stared, the internal war visible on his face. The alpha instinct fought with the reality of the terrified child. I could almost see him processing it, the possessive, primal need to take warring with the heartbreaking evidence that it would only do more harm. Finally, the tension in his massive shoulders slumped in defeat. He stayed on his knees, making himself smaller, less threatening. It was the most powerful display of restraint I had ever witnessed. He looked from Tommy's shaking form to my face, his gaze stripped of all arrogance, all dominance. It was raw, open, and utterly lost. The mate bond hummed between us, no longer a threat, but a low, aching thrum of shared pain. He swallowed hard, the sound loud in the quiet woods. The alpha was gone. This was just a man. A desperate, broken man. "Please," he rasped, the words sounding foreign and rough on his tongue. "Tell me what to do. I'll do anything."
My wolf paced the cage of my ribs, a restless, snarling beast demanding action. Take. Secure. End threat. For 3 weeks, that instinct had been my only guide, a burning fuel that kept me moving when exhaustion and grief tried to drag me down. Now, that same instinct was a liability. Here, in this small, clean cabin that smelled of pine, dried herbs, and her, my alpha power was useless. Worse than useless. Every time I took a step too fast, or let a growl rumble in my chest, Tommy would flinch, his small body curling in on itself. And Freya would fix me with a look that could freeze hell. So I watched. I forced myself into a stillness that felt like a betrayal of my own nature, and I learned. She didn't just treat Tommy's wounds, she coaxed him back to life. Her voice was a low, steady murmur, a current of calm in the terrified silence of his mind. She'd sit on the floor with him for an hour, not speaking, just arranging dried leaves into patterns. She'd hum a tuneless melody while she stirred a pot on the stove, and I'd watch the tension bleed from my nephew's shoulders. My pack's healers were competent, their methods clinical. They set bones, stitched wounds, and administered drafts. They did not sing to traumatize children. They did not know the names of the wild herbs she crushed into a paste that smelled of earth and rain, a poultice she applied to the fading bruises on Tommy's arms with a touch so gentle it made my teeth ache. She is the key, my wolf admitted, a grudging respect warring with his possessive roar. She heals him, and she was slowly killing me. Every movement she made was a test of my control. The way she tucked a stray strand of dark hair behind her ear, the focused line of her brow, the unconscious sway of her hips as she moved from the hearth to the table. My body was a taut wire of need, humming with the force of the mate bond. The air was thick with her scent, wildflowers and ozone, and a strength that called to the very core of me. Mine. The word was a constant, hammering beat against my skull. Tonight, she ladled a thick stew into 3 wooden bowls. It was simple fare, venison and root vegetables, but the smell filled the cabin, a promise of warmth and sustenance. She placed a bowl in front of me without a word, her focus entirely on coaxing Tommy to eat. "Just one bite, sweet boy," she murmured, her voice the softest thing I'd ever heard. "For me." Tommy looked from the spoon to her face, his eyes wide and haunted. Slowly, he opened his mouth. A victory. A small miracle performed by the fierce rogue who held my world in her hands. I ate, my gaze fixed on them. This was what a family felt like. A mate. A child. The primal, territorial part of me wanted to roar my claim, to pull her onto my lap and sink my teeth into the pulse point on her neck that beat a frantic, alluring rhythm. I wanted to show her that the safety she'd built for Tommy, I could provide for them both tenfold. But I saw the shadows under her eyes, the exhaustion that pulled at the corners of her mouth. She was running on fumes, pouring every ounce of her energy into my nephew. When the meal was done and Tommy was a small, sleeping lump on the cot, wrapped in a dozen blankets, she finally sagged against the wall. "I'll take first watch," I said. It wasn't a request. It was a fact. Her head snapped up, suspicion flaring in her eyes. "I've fine." "You're exhausted," I countered, keeping my voice level. "My nephew is safe because of you. The least I can do is let his protector rest. You can't heal him if you collapse." She studied my face, searching for a trap. I held her gaze, letting her see the truth of my words. There was no angle here. Only a debt I could never fully repay. Finally, with a stiff nod, she pushed off the wall and went to the small pallet of furs she'd made for herself on the other side of the room. I settled into the chair by the door, the shotgun she'd first aimed at me resting across my lap. The moon rose, casting silver light through the single window. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the soft rhythm of their breathing. Tommy's small and shallow. Hers deeper, finally succumbing to a sleep she desperately needed. My wolf was quiet for the first time in days, content to be the sentinel, protecting our pack. An hour passed, then another. I watched her sleep, the fierce lines of her face softened, her guard finally down. A lock of hair fell across her cheek, and the urge to move it, to feel the silk of her skin under my fingertips, was a physical pain. As I watched, I noticed something else. A faint, shimmering energy in the air around Tommy's cot. It was almost invisible, a heat haze of warmth and light that seemed to emanate from Freya's sleeping form and settle over the boy like a second blanket. It pulsed with her breathing, a gentle, golden tide of pure life force. My senses, honed by the alpha blood in my veins, recognized it for what it was. Power. Raw, untamed, and immense. The pieces slammed into place in my mind with the force of a physical blow. The rogues who took Tommy weren't just brutes. They were after his budding psychic gifts. They trafficked in rare power. And the woman sleeping across the room from me, she was a goddamn beacon of it. They hadn't just stumbled upon her. If they found us, they wouldn't just be coming for Tommy. They'd be coming for her. and they would see her not as a person, but as a prize, a weapon to be captured and used. A cold, black rage, colder and deadlier than anything I'd felt before, settled in my gut. They would not have her. Her breathing hitched. A small, wounded sound escaped her lips, and she shifted, her hand twitching as if to ward off a blow. A nightmare. My hand tightened on the shotgun, my knuckles white. I wanted to go to her, to wake her, to pull her into my arms and promise to slaughter anyone who had ever put that look of fear on her face. But I stayed put. That wasn't what she needed from me. Not yet. She needed a partner. A guard. When her breathing evened out again, I let the silence stretch, my mind racing. The danger was 1,000 times greater than I'd imagined. And this woman, my mate, was at the very center of it. I had to know. I had to understand what I was protecting. The fire crackled, spitting a spark onto the hearth. I waited until the first hint of dawn painted the sky gray, my decision hardening with every passing minute. When she finally stirred, her eyes blinking open, they found me watching her. The familiar wariness was there, but it was clouded with sleep. I didn't give her time to build her walls back up. "You're healing," I said, my voice low and rough in the quiet room. "It's not just herbs, is it?"
The silence in the cabin had a weight to it. It wasn't the empty, lonely silence I was used to, the kind that let the whispers of the forest creep in. This was a thick, humming silence, charged with the presence of the two males sharing my space. Tommy was a small, warm lump under a pile of blankets on the cot, his breathing finally even and deep. Riker sat in my other chair near the hearth, the firelight carving sharp angles on his face and turning his eyes to molten gold. For 3 days, we'd existed in this strange domestic truce. We moved around each other, a careful choreography of shared tasks and unspoken boundaries. He'd chopped a mountain of firewood without being asked. I'd cooked meals he ate with a quiet, almost reverent gratitude. We were a team, and the ease of it terrified me more than his initial aggression ever had. Teamwork implied trust. Trust implied connection. And for a rogue, connection was a death sentence. He broke the quiet, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. "You never said which pack you ran from." It wasn't an accusation, but it landed like one. My spine went rigid. An alpha asking about my past was like a predator asking a rabbit for its favorite hiding spot. "Does it matter?" I shot back, my tone sharper than I intended. I poked the fire, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. "I'm here now. That's all that's relevant." "It matters," he said, his gaze steady and unyielding. "Someone taught you to be afraid of your own shadow. Someone taught you that accepting help was a weakness. I want to know who." My breath hitched. He wasn't asking as an alpha demanding information. He was asking as a man who saw the scars I tried so hard to hide. The sarcasm I usually used as a shield felt flimsy, useless. I stared into the flames, the heat stinging my eyes. "The Ironwood Pack," I whispered, the name tasting like ash in my mouth. My alpha, he didn't see my gift as a blessing. He saw it as a resource. The memories came flooding back, slick and ugly. I wasn't a pack member. I was the pack's tool. A fighter gets his arm broken in a territorial dispute. I'd be woken at midnight to knit the bone back together, so he could fight again by morning. A she-wolf miscarries after a brutal training exercise. I was expected to heal her body, but never allowed to comfort her spirit. I was kept isolated, guarded. A secret weapon. The alpha used my healing to make his warriors reckless, unbreakable. He used me to build his power, and in return, I got a locked room and the constant, suffocating weight of his control. I finally looked at him, letting him see the raw truth in my eyes. I wasn't a person. I was an asset. When I realized he was negotiating to lend me to a neighboring pack in exchange for territory, I ran. I've been running ever since. The silence that followed was different. It was heavy with understanding. Riker's jaw was clenched, a muscle twitching violently. The primal energy rolling off him wasn't directed at me, but at a ghost from my past. "He used you," Riker growled, the words ripped from his throat. He perverted the most sacred of gifts. Before I could process the fierce protectiveness in his voice, his expression fractured, the anger dissolving into a profound, gut-wrenching grief. He scrubbed a hand over his face, and when he looked up, the powerful alpha was gone. In his place was a man drowning in failure. "My sister. Tommy's mother, she died a year ago," he said, his voice thick. "I promised her. I swore I would protect him, raise him as my own. He's the only piece of her I have left." He stared at the cot where his nephew slept, his gaze filled with a pain so deep it was a physical thing in the room. The day he was taken, I was in a council meeting. arguing about patrol routes. Useless, stupid pack politics. My beta mind linked me, and the first thing I heard was panic. By the time I got back to the pack house, his room was empty. The window was broken. And his scent, it was faint, laced with the stench of rogues and his own terror. He choked on the words, his throat working. For 3 weeks, my wolf has been clawing at the inside of my skin, screaming at me. Failure. You failed her. You failed the pup. I see his face every time I close my eyes. I see him looking at me now, and he doesn't see his uncle. He sees the man who wasn't there when the monsters came. My carefully constructed walls didn't just crack, they crumbled into dust. This wasn't the ruthless alpha from the stories. This was a man shattered by love and loss. My heart ached for him, a painful, unfamiliar throb of empathy. As if summoned by the weight of our shared sorrow, a tiny whimper came from the cot. We both froze. Tommy was stirring, his small body trembling under the blankets. Riker started to rise, then stopped himself, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. He was terrified of scaring him. He just stood there, helpless, his entire being focused on the child, his face a mask of love and agony. Tommy's eyes fluttered open. They weren't wild with panic. They were hazy with sleep, and they drifted from the fire, to me, and then they landed on Riker. The cabin was utterly still. The world seemed to hold its breath. And then a small, raspy sound broke the silence. A word. A name. Daemon. The sound, as fragile as a moth's wing, hit Riker like a physical blow. He staggered back a step, a choked sob tearing from his chest. He didn't rush forward. He just sank to his knees, right there on the rough-hewn floor, and buried his face in his hands as silent, racking sobs shook his massive frame. Tears streamed down my own face, hot and fast. It was a breakthrough. A miracle. A single word that meant everything. I know you. I remember you. You are safe. I looked from the weeping alpha on the floor to the small boy now watching him with wide, curious eyes, and my heart felt like it was going to burst. In that moment, we weren't an alpha, a rogue, and a victim. We were just thus. I didn't even realize I had moved until I was standing in front of Riker. He looked up, his face wrecked with relief, his golden eyes shimmering with unshed tears. The raw emotion between us was a current, pulling me in. The air grew thick, charged with something more than just gratitude. It was intimacy. It was a shared victory that belonged only to us. He rose slowly to his feet, never breaking eye contact. He was so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the intoxicating scent of pine, earth, and pure Riker. He lifted a hand, his calloused thumb brushing away a tear from my cheek. The touch was an electric shock, searing a path straight to my core. His gaze dropped to my lips. The world narrowed to the space between us. He leaned in, his intention clear, his eyes asking a question I was desperate to answer. I leaned in too, my own body betraying 5 years of survival instincts. My lips parted. I could feel his breath, warm and sweet. 1 more inch. 1 more second. Panic, cold and sharp, slammed into me. Alpha. Pack. Cage. The words screamed in my head, a primal alarm bell. This was how it started. A moment of weakness. A crack in the armor. You let them in, you let them see you, and then they own you. I jerked back as if I'd been burned, my hand flying to my mouth. The spell shattered. The air turned to ice. The tender hope in Riker's eyes vanished, replaced by a flash of hurt so profound it stole my breath, followed quickly by a shuttered mask of confusion. He said nothing, but the question hung in the broken space between us, louder than any accusation. Why? The sound was so foreign in the tense silence of the past week that it took my brain a moment to process it. Laughter. Not a chuckle, not a hesitant giggle, but a full, bubbling peal of laughter from a 6-year-old boy. I froze, my hand hovering over the pot of stew I was stirring. Outside, in the dappled afternoon sunlight filtering through the pines, Tommy was crouched by the small creek that ran behind my cabin. He'd spent the morning meticulously arranging a line of flat, gray stones, creating a miniature dam. Now a tiny leaf he'd launched as a boat was caught in the current, spinning in a frantic circle. And he was laughing at it. My heart did a painful clench in my chest. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. My eyes automatically sought out Riker. He was leaning against a thick pine tree, arms crossed over his massive chest, pretending to be casual. But he wasn't. His entire being was focused on his nephew. The hard lines of his face had softened, and a look of pure, unadulterated awe was etched there. He looked like a man witnessing a miracle. And maybe he was. For days, we had fallen into a rhythm that felt dangerously domestic. We worked as a seamless unit, a silent team dedicated to coaxing a traumatized little boy back to the world. I would handle the gentle coaxing, the healing sessions where I'd push warmth and calm into his small body. Riker would handle security, his powerful presence a silent, watchful perimeter around the cabin. He'd chop wood with a quiet fury, his muscles bunching and releasing, and then sit for hours, patiently trying to engage Tommy with a carved wooden wolf, never pushing, always waiting. We shared meals. We took turns on watch. We moved around each other in the small cabin with an intimacy that hummed with unspoken tension. The air was thick with it, with the pull of the mate bond and something more, something grown in the soil of shared purpose and mutual respect. Tommy, oblivious to the adult drama swirling around him, picked up another leaf. He looked over at Riker, his dark eyes bright with excitement. He pointed at the leaf, then at the water, and made a surprisingly loud, vroom, sound before launching it. Riker's breath hitched. He pushed off the tree, a slow, magnificent grin spreading across his face, transforming him from a fearsome alpha into just a man overwhelmed with joy. He caught my eye across the small clearing, and his gaze was electric. He mouthed the words he's playing. My own smile felt wobbly, my throat thick with emotion. All the fear, the running, the lonely years, they all seemed to fade in the face of this one perfect moment. This felt like a victory. Our victory. The space between us seemed to collapse. One moment he was by the tree, the next he was standing in front of me, his shadow falling over me, his scent, pine, earth, and pure male power, wrapping around me like a blanket. He didn't stop. He raised a large, calloused hand and cupped my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek with a reverence that made my knees weak. "Freya," he breathed, his voice rough with emotion. It wasn't a command or a declaration. It was a prayer. And then his mouth was on mine. It wasn't gentle. It was a collision. A desperate, hungry claiming pact with weeks of tension, a universe of gratitude, and the raw, undeniable power of the bond. His lips were firm, searing, moving against mine with a certainty that left no room for thought. One of his hands slid from my jaw to the back of my neck, tangling in my hair and tilting my head back, while the other arm snaked around my waist, hauling me flush against his unyielding body. For a split second, I gave in completely. I melted. My hands came up to fist in his shirt, and I kissed him back with all the pent-up loneliness and burgeoning hope inside me. It felt like coming home. It felt right. Then the panic hit. A cold, familiar dread that clawed its way up my throat. This wasn't me. This was the bond. A biological imperative, a trick of shifter genetics designed to chain me to this man, to his pack, to the very life I'd almost died to escape. My feelings were growing, yes, but this overwhelming tidal wave of need. It was a cage, beautifully decorated, but a cage all the same. I tore my mouth from his, planting my hands on his chest and shoving. No. Igaspat, stumbling backward. The air rushed back into my lungs, cold and sharp. I raised a trembling hand to my lips, which still burned from his touch. They felt bruised, branded. Claimed. The joy was gone from his face, replaced by a dark, wounded confusion. He looked at me, then at my hand covering my mouth, and the monster I'd first feared flickered in his eyes.
My wolf was purring. It was a low, deep rumble in my chest, a feeling of such profound contentment I hadn't felt it in years. Not since before my brother and his mate were killed. I leaned against the pine, watching my nephew, my pup, play by the creek. He was still too thin, still had shadows under his eyes, but he was alive. He was healing. And it was all because of her. Freya. My mate. My eyes tracked her as she moved inside the cabin, her scent a constant, intoxicating pull on my senses. Every instinct I had screamed to go to her, to pull her into my arms, to finish the claiming the bond demanded. But I'd held back. I'd watched her with Tommy, seen the infinite patience and gentle strength she possessed. She wasn't a prize to be won. She was a miracle to be earned. And I would spend the rest of my life earning her. Then Tommy laughed. The sound shot straight through me, erasing weeks of gut-wrenching fear and guilt. It was the sound of life, of hope. My wolf surged, wanting to howl its relief to the sky. I looked at Freya, needing to share this with her, the only other person in the world who understood the depth of this moment. The smile she gave me in return was a gut punch, full of a light that made my heart ache. When Tommy looked at me, his eyes bright, and made that vroom sound, it was like the final lock on my grief had shattered. He was coming back. He was remembering how to be a kid. The relief was a physical force, a wave that propelled me forward. I didn't think. I just moved. All I could see was her, the architect of this impossible joy. Her scent, her light, the way her lips parted in surprise. Mine. The word was a roar in my head. My mate. My salvation. I cupped her face, the skin of her cheek softer than I could have imagined. I said her name, needing her to know this wasn't just the alpha in me, it was all of me. Then I kissed her. It was like lightning striking, a firestorm of sensation, of taste, of scent. She tasted of herbs and sweet tea, and a unique flavor that was just her. For one perfect, earth-shattering second, she kissed me back. She surrendered. Her body went soft against mine, her hands grabbed my shirt, and my wolf howled in triumph. She accepts. Mate. Family. Whole. Then she ripped herself away. The rejection was a physical blow, more stunning than any punch. She stumbled back, her eyes wide with pure, unadulterated terror. She looked at me like I was a weapon, a threat. The purring in my chest died, replaced by a wounded, confused snarl. Why? My wolf demanded. She is ours. Why does she fear us? Freya? I took a step forward, my hand outstretched, my voice rougher than I intended. She flinched. A full-body flinch, as if she expected me to strike her. I froze, my hand hovering in the empty air between us. The sight of her fear slammed a wall of ice around my heart. I had just gotten a taste of what a future with her and Tommy could be, a life of warmth and laughter. And in a single instinctive act, I had terrified her, reminding her not of the man who adored her, but of the monster she believed all alphas to be. And as I stood there, watching the woman who was my entire world look at me with the same terror my nephew once had, a cold prickle of dread crawled up my spine. It was a feeling I knew well, the feeling of being watched. Her lips were still imprinted on mine. The taste of her, wild herbs and a sweetness that was purely Freya, was a brand on my soul. My wolf was a storm under my skin, a roaring, possessive beast that wanted to haul her into my arms, push her against the rough-hewn wall of the cabin, and finish what that kiss started. It wanted to mark her, claim her, sink my teeth into the pulse point of her throat and declare to the world, to the gods, to anyone listening mine. But I held it back. I had to, because Tommy was watching us, his wide, curious eyes finally losing their haunted edge, and Freya had pulled away with a gasp, her own eyes a mix of raw want and pure terror. She was a wild thing, my mate. One wrong move and she'd bolt. I'd spent years searching for her without knowing it, and I wouldn't lose her now to the brute force of my own instinct. Patience. It was a lesson I was learning the hard way. I watched her now, the last rays of sunlight filtering through the tall pines, casting stripes of gold across the cabin's small porch. She was kneeling in front of Tommy, murmuring to him as she rebandaged a scrape on his knee he'd gotten while chasing a butterfly. Her touch was gentle, her voice a low hum that soothed not just the boy, but the raging wolf inside me. This was my world now. This tiny, fierce woman and my broken nephew. Everything that mattered was right here in this small clearing. For the first time in weeks, a fragile peace settled in my chest. Then the wind shifted. My head snapped up. The change was instantaneous, a primal switch flipping inside me. The peace shattered. The air, once clean and smelling of pine and my mate, was now tainted. It was faint, almost imperceptible to a human, but to my wolf, it was a siren's wail. Copper. Stale sweat. The bitter, mangy scent of rogue wolves. Not one. Several. Freya. My voice was a low growl, a sound I hadn't intended to make. She flinched, her head turning toward me, her eyes wide with alarm at the change in my posture. I was no longer the man who had kissed her senseless moments ago. I was the alpha of the Moonridge pack, and my territory was about to be breached. Get Tommy inside. Now, I commanded, my voice leaving no room for argument. Her own instincts flared. She didn't question me. She scooped Tommy into her arms, his small body clinging to her as she backed toward the cabin door, her eyes locked on mine, searching for the source of the threat. What is it? She whispered, her hand on the doorknob. Trouble, I said, my eyes scanning the dense tree line, my senses stretching, tasting the air. They were close. Too close. Locked the door behind me. I didn't wait for a reply. I moved to the edge of the clearing, my body coiled, every muscle tight and ready. The scent was stronger here. They were circling, testing the boundaries, smelling us. Smelling her. A fresh wave of fury, black and hot, washed through me. They weren't just a threat to my nephew anymore. They were a threat to my mate. A twig snapped in the undergrowth to the east. Too loud to be a deer. It was a signal. I spun around, strode back to the cabin, and slammed the door behind me, throwing the heavy deadbolt. The small room was suddenly suffocating. Freya stood pressed against the far wall, Tommy buried against her chest, his face hidden in her shoulder. Her shotgun was propped by the door, but her hands were full with my nephew. Her knuckles were white. "They found us," she stated. It wasn't a question. The terror was back in her eyes, the familiar look of a hunted animal. The look I wanted to erase from her face forever. "They did," I confirmed, my voice grim. I had to tell her. All of it. She had to understand what we were facing. "This isn't random, Freya. They didn't just stumble on this cabin." I paced the small space, my wolf clawing for release. "The rogues who took Tommy, they're not just scavengers. They're a faction, a cult almost. They call themselves the Shattered Claws." I saw the flicker of recognition in her eyes. She'd heard the whispers. Every rogue had. "They believe the old packs are weak, decadent," I continued, forcing the words out. "They want to burn it all down and build a new order, one based on pure power. They collect assets, weapons, and sometimes those assets are wolves." I stopped in front of her, forcing myself to meet her gaze. "Tommy wasn't just taken because he's my heir. He has a gift, a rare psychic ability to sense and track other supernaturals. To the Shattered Claws, a pup like that isn't a child. He's a bloodhound they can use to hunt their enemies. He's a weapon." The horror dawned on her face, but it was followed by something else. A dawning, sickening comprehension. Her eyes darted from Tommy to me, and I could see the gears turning in her sharp mind. She was putting the pieces together. "And me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "My gift," my heart clenched, "is even rarer. A healer who can mend shifter injuries, mend the mind. Freya, you're not just a prize to them. You're a miracle. The ability to heal their fighters, to erase the trauma of battle. They wouldn't just enslave you. They would worship you, and they would never, ever let you go." The truth hung in the air between us, heavy and poisonous. She wasn't just caught in the crossfire. She was a primary target. Her greatest secret, the very thing she'd run from her whole life, was the thing that had put the biggest target on her back. I saw the exact moment the choice settled in her. Her shoulders, which had been slumped in fear, straightened. The terror in her eyes didn't vanish, but it was banked, overshadowed by a hard, cold fire. She looked at Tommy, who was peering at me from the safety of her arms, and then she looked at me. Her chin lifted. I expected her to ask how she could run. I expected her to plan her escape. My wolf was already bracing for the agony of letting her go, of sending her away to keep her safe. "They've been hunting me my whole life," she said, her voice low and vibrating with a strength that shook me to my core. "My old pack, other rogues. I'm tired of running." She took a deep breath, her gaze unwavering. "You said this is the best place to make a stand. So we make a stand." My breath caught in my throat. She wasn't running. She was choosing to stay. To fight. With me. For us. It was a bigger declaration than the kiss, more binding than any vow. It was a choice made in the face of death, a testament of trust that I hadn't earned but would die to protect. "Okay," I breathed, a wave of fierce, protective pride surging through me. "Okay, Freya." The time for talk was over. Action was all that was left. "The windows," I barked, my alpha instincts taking over completely. "Block them. Blankets, the mattress, anything." She didn't hesitate. She gently set Tommy down in the corner farthest from the door, pressing a kiss to his hair. "Stay here, sweet boy. Stay quiet. We're just going to play a game." While she worked, I checked the load in my Glock, the cold, heavy weight of familiar comfort in my hand. I glanced at her shotgun by the door. We were outmanned, cornered. But we weren't helpless. They were coming for a healer and a child. They were going to find an alpha protecting his mate and his heir. We worked in a grim, silent tandem, barricading the small cabin against the coming storm. The sun had fully set now, plunging the forest into a deep, menacing darkness. The only light was the single lantern on the table, casting long, dancing shadows that felt like enemies in their own right. When we were done, we stood in the center of the room, back to back, a silent two-person army. Freya held her shotgun, her stance solid, her fear transformed into furious resolve. I could feel the warmth of her back against mine, a point of contact in a world about to explode. Then we heard it. Not a twig snap this time. A low, guttural growl, carried on the night wind from just beyond the tree line. It was a sound of hunger, of imminent violence. It was the sound of the cage door opening. They were here.
The first sound wasn't the splintering of wood or a feral snarl. It was silence. The crickets, the night birds, the whisper of wind through the pines. It all just stopped. A dead, heavy quiet pressed in on the cabin, and the hair on my arms stood straight up. "Riker," I breathed, my voice a ghost in the sudden stillness. He was already moving, a shadow detaching from the armchair where he'd been watching over a sleeping Tommy. His eyes, fixed on the front window, were no longer the warm whiskey I was getting used to. They were hard, cold flint. "They're here. Get Tommy. Bathroom. Now." His voice was a low command, no room for argument. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the suffocating silence. I scooped Tommy from the cot, his small body limp with sleep. He whimpered, burying his face in my neck, his scent a mix of lavender soap and innocent fear that sent a fresh spike of protective fury through me. I didn't make it 2 steps before the ward's Riker had painstakingly carved into the doorframe, flared with a violent, sizzling blue light, and then shattered. The sound was like a thunderclap inside the cabin. Tommy screamed, a raw, terrified sound that ripped through me. Then came the crash. The heavy oak door buckled, splintering inward as a massive body slammed against it. Another impact and the frame cracked. Riker was in front of me in a heartbeat, a living wall of muscle and fury. "Stay behind me, Freya," he snarled, and the sound was no longer entirely human. I watched, frozen for a second in horrified awe, as the change took him. It wasn't a slow, agonizing transformation from the movies. It was a violent, instantaneous ripple. His bones shifted with a series of sickening cracks, his body expanding, muscle and sinew twisting under his skin. Dark fur sprouted, and his face elongated into a muzzle, lips peeling back to reveal teeth that were no longer teeth, but daggers. A low, guttural growl tore from his new form, a sound that vibrated through the floorboards and into my bones. He wasn't Riker anymore. He was a monster. A beautiful, terrifying monster whose only purpose was to protect us. The door exploded inward. 3 massive wolves, their fur matted and their eyes glowing with a rabid red light, poured into the small cabin. They were huge, bigger than any normal wolf, their snarls echoing in the confined space. My world narrowed to the threat, to the small, trembling child in my arms, and to the giant black wolf standing between us and death. Riker met the first one with a roar that shook the very foundations of my soul. It was a clash of titans, a whirlwind of claws and teeth. I scrambled back, pressing myself and Tommy into the corner by the hearth, grabbing the heavy iron poker. It was a pathetic weapon, but it was something. My focus was on Riker, on the blur of black fur and snapping jaws. But then the third rogue, a wiry gray with a scarred muzzle, ignored the alpha-on-alpha violence. Its red eyes locked directly onto me. It lunged, not at Riker, but over the couch, straight for me and Tommy. "The healer," a voice growled, not from the wolf, but from the man beside it, a shifter half-changed. "Graves wants the healer alive." Riker's head snapped around. A guttural roar of pure, possessive rage ripped from him as he saw the threat. He tried to disengage, to get to me, but the other 2 rogues pressed their attack, flanking him. One of them sank its teeth into his shoulder. A pained snarl was torn from him, and the scent of his blood, rich and coppery, hit the air. My blood ran cold. Seeing him hurt, seeing that rogue's claws reaching for Tommy, broke something inside me. Fear became ice. Hesitation became action. I shoved Tommy behind me, stood up, and swung the iron poker with every ounce of strength I had. The poker connected with the side of the gray wolf's head with a sickening crack. It yelped, stumbling back, shaking its head. It wasn't enough to stop it, but it was enough to make it pause. Its eyes, burning with fury, swiveled back to me. It was going to kill me, and I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that Riker wouldn't get to me in time.
Pain, white hot and sharp in my shoulder. The scent of my own blood was an irritant, a distraction from the only thing that mattered. Freya. My wolf was a storm of rage inside me, a primal engine of violence. These bastards, these filth-ridden curs, dared to enter my territory, dared to threaten my nephew, dared to lay eyes on my mate. Mine. The word was a litany, a war cry in my soul. Protect. Kill. Mine. I ripped my shoulder free, tearing flesh, and snapped the neck of the wolf that had bitten me. Its body went limp, slumping to the floor. One down. I turned, my entire being focused on the gray cur stalking Freya. It was ignoring me. A fatal mistake. They thought I was the prize, the alpha to be defeated. They didn't understand. She was the center of this universe. She was the reason for the slaughter that was about to happen. I saw her swing the poker. The sound of the impact, the sheer, desperate bravery of it, sent a surge of pride and fury through me. She was magnificent, a warrior queen defending her own. But the rogue was only stunned. It gathered itself, a low growl rumbling in its chest as it prepared to lunge, to rip her throat out. The last shred of my human control vanished. The world went red. There was no thought, only instinct. No strategy, only annihilation. I was no longer an alpha defending his cabin. I was a force of nature, a beast of vengeance unleashed. I launched myself over the couch, a black-furred missile of claws and teeth. I hit the gray wolf midair. We crashed into the wall, the impact splintering the log construction. Its neck was in my jaws before we hit the ground. A single, brutal twist, and it was over. I didn't pause. The last rogue, the one who had been fighting the man, turned to run. There was no escape. I was on him in 2 bounds, dragging him down, my claws tearing through his hide. His terrified whimpers were a satisfying counterpoint to the protective roar still building in my chest. Then silence. The only sounds were my own harsh, ragged breaths, the frantic pounding of my heart, and the soft, terrified sobs of my nephew. The red haze of battle slowly receded. I stood over the carnage, my fur matted with the blood of my enemies, my body aching. The fight was over. They were gone. I turned, and my world stopped. Freya was pressed against the wall, her face pale, a smudge of soot on her cheek. She held Tommy tight against her, her knuckles white on the iron poker she still gripped like a lifeline. She was safe. They were both safe. My wolf, sated with victory, saw only one thing left to do. She wasn't looking at the bodies. She wasn't looking at the wreckage of her home. Her wide, dark eyes were locked on me, on the beast, and there was no fear in them. There was shock. There was awe. And there was something else, something that mirrored the raw, possessive inferno still burning in my own chest. The need to protect was fulfilled. Now the need to claim surged forward, an unstoppable tide. I took a single, heavy step toward her. A growl rumbled deep in my chest, no longer a threat to an enemy, but a promise to my mate.
The silence that fell after the last rogue's dying gasp was heavier than the battle itself. The air was a toxic cocktail of blood, sweat, and the sharp, metallic tang of my own spent power. Splintered wood from the cabin walls littered the floor like fallen trees. Outside, the forest was unnervingly still. My gaze was locked on the magnificent, terrifying beast standing over the body of the rogue leader. Riker. His fur was matted with blood, some his, most not, and his massive chest heaved with ragged breaths. But his eyes, those molten gold eyes of his wolf, were fixed on me. They held no savagery, only a raw, possessive focus that stripped away everything but the two of us. He took a step toward me, and I didn't flinch. I didn't even think about reaching for a weapon. The rogue healer who had lived in fear for 5 years died tonight in the fire of this battle. The woman who stood in her place wanted only one thing. Him. With a sound that was half-groan, half-whimper, Riker shifted. The sickening crack of bones reforming was a sound I should have feared, but it was the sound of my mate returning to me. He stood naked and splattered with the evidence of his victory, his body a roadmap of corded muscle and hard-won scars. He was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. He moved past the carnage without a glance, his eyes never leaving mine. He stopped before me, his powerful frame blocking out the world. I could feel the heat rolling off his skin, smell the primal scent of alpha wolf, pine, and a scent that was purely Riker. It was the scent of home. "Tommy," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "Asleep," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through my bones. "Exhausted but safe. My beta is watching the door." My relief was a physical wave, making my knees weak. Riker's hands came up to cup my face, his touch impossibly gentle. His thumbs stroked over my cheekbones, wiping away tears I hadn't realized I'd shed. "You fought," he said, his voice thick with awe. "For him. For me. I'm done running," I told him, my own voice shaking with the force of the truth. All the walls I had so carefully built, all the sarcastic defenses and fierce independence, they had crumbled to dust. In their place was a certainty, so profound it stole my breath. This was it. This was where I belonged. "Mine," he growled, the single word a vow, a prayer, a command. And for the first time, it didn't sound like a cage. It sounded like a promise. "Yours," I breathed, surrendering every last piece of my broken, guarded heart. That was all it took. His mouth crashed down on mine, and it wasn't a kiss of gentle discovery. It was a claiming. It was raw, hungry, and desperate, a collision of two souls who had fought through hell to find each other. I met his ferocity with my own, my hands tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. The taste of him was blood and victory and want. He swept me into his arms as if I weighed nothing and carried me into the bedroom. The room was untouched by the fight, a small sanctuary in the midst of the chaos. He laid me on the bed, his body following mine down, covering me, branding me with his heat and his weight. "I'm going to make you mine in every way, Freya," he rasped against my throat, his lips tracing a searing path down to the hollow of my collarbone. "I'm going to mark you, scent you, love you until my soul is stamped on yours and yours is on mine." There was no fear. Only a deep, aching need to be closer, to be one. "Yes," I gasped, arching into him. "Riker, please." Every touch was electric, every kiss a brand. He worshipped my body with a reverence that shattered me, treating me not as a prize won in battle, but as a cherished treasure he'd finally found. He showed me what it meant to be wanted by an alpha, to be the center of his world, the anchor for his wild wolf. And I gave him everything I was, the healer, the rogue, the woman, holding nothing back. This wasn't just passion, it was the final, irrevocable sealing of the mate bond, a physical manifestation of the emotional surrender that had already taken place. It was violent and tender, desperate and reverent, a perfect storm of love and lust and destiny. Later, lying tangled in the sheets, his arm a heavy, possessive weight over my waist, I listened. The cabin was quiet except for the sound of our breathing and the steady, reassuring presence of the pack guards outside. I could feel the thrum of Riker's heart against my back, a steady rhythm that matched my own. The fear was gone. The loneliness that had been my constant companion for years was a distant memory. I was no longer Freya Chun, the rogue on the run. I was his. He was mine. And with Tommy safe under our protection, we were the beginning of a family. Lying there, safe in my alpha's arms, I felt a peace I never thought possible. This wasn't an ending. It was the first real day of my life. 3 months. Sunlight streams through the large kitchen window of the alpha's house, glinting off the stainless steel counters I once would have found intimidating. Now they just feel like home. I flip a pancake, the sizzle a familiar, comforting sound. At the sturdy oak table, Tommy is meticulously arranging blueberries into a smiley face on his own plate, his tongue stuck out in concentration. His laughter, when it comes, is a bright, beautiful sound that fills every corner of my world. I watch him, and a phantom ache echoes in my chest, the memory of a small, silent boy, all sharp angles and terrified eyes, clinging to me in a dark cabin. Now he's solid, healthy, and so full of life it spills out of him. "Mama," he says, his voice clear and confident. "Can I have more syrup?" The word still hits me with the force of a tidal wave, a sweet, overwhelming surge of love that steals my breath. Mama. I never thought I'd hear that word, never dreamed I deserved it. I smile, my heart so full it feels like it might burst. "Of course, little wolf. But only if you save some of that pancake for me." He giggles, a promise in the sound. I feel a presence behind me, a familiar warmth and a scent of pine and power that no longer signals danger, but safety. Riker's arms slide around my waist, his chin resting on my shoulder as he watches his nephew. His touch is a grounding force, a constant reminder that I'm not running anymore. I'm home.
I stand behind her, breathing in her scent of wildflowers and healing, and my wolf settles into a state of perfect, absolute contentment. Mine. Our family. Safe. For years, my life was duty, rage, and a hollow ache for something I couldn't name. Now I watch Freya place a fresh pancake on Tommy's plate, her movements full of a gentle grace that has soothed not just my nephew, but the entire pack. She's not just my mate, she's our heart. Pack members seek her out in the clinic she established, not just for her gift, but for her quiet strength. She healed us all. I press a kiss to the sensitive skin of her neck, feeling her lean back against me. "He looks happy," I murmur, my voice thick with an emotion I no longer hide. "He is happy," she whispers back, turning her head to look at me. Her eyes, once so guarded, are wide open and full of a love that mirrors my own. We all are. I look from her radiant face to my nephew, who is now trying to balance a blueberry on his nose. The house is filled with light and laughter. It's more than I ever thought to ask the goddess for. I tighten my hold on Freya, pulling her flush against me. The pack is strong. My nephew is whole. I whisper against her ear, my hand drifting down to rest possessively on her stomach. And my Luna is home. This house is perfect, but it could use a few more little wolves running around, don't you think? The soft gasp she gives, followed by the brilliant, hopeful smile that lights up her entire face, is all the answer I'll ever need.